So today's talk, I'm talking about the generative network, which is basically a methodology that is used for creating more realistic simulations. I do know a lot of you are not doing computational stuff, so I will try to keep this talk simple and easier to understand for you. Also focus more on the methodology rather than the actual work I'm using this for, because I don't want to bore you too much about the details. And it's yeah, so basically this method is quite applicable to a wide range of studies, and hopefully it helps you someday. Yes, so I will start off with an introduction. I'm Charles, and I'm a PhD candidate under the OB Lab. So for OB Lab, we are mainly interested in the study of evolution. And here I have an example of this evolutionary diagram that you typically see on fanciful papers. Well, I don't totally understand what's going on, but I just want to point you out to the duration of evolutionary processes we are studying, and that is actually in millions of years. Well, we obviously don't live that long. That's why we can't really perform empirical studies on evolutionary processes. And well, this creates a huge problem for not only evolutionary studies, but also for quite a lot of other fields where there's not enough data to perform the studies. So this is where simulation comes in, where we are able to perform computational simulations by just inputting a few or understanding what kind of parameters are involved in the process. And we can perform a 100-year evolutionary process or 100 years worth of process in just a few seconds using computational simulations. So how does this simulation approach works? Well, I'm going to use a picture of a cat as an example. Now to simulate a picture of a cat, for example, the diagram on the right. So what kind of things do we need, or what's the prerequisite to doing this? Well, we obviously need a training data set. So we first need to understand what does actual cats look like. And here you can have maybe hundreds of thousands of different pictures of cats. And all these pictures of the cats will be then be given into be input into a machine learning model to identify the different features, the common features of what a cat has. Just to make it easier to understand, I'm just extracting 3 features, which is triangular ears, having 2 eyes, and a mouth as the feature. So this is what we kind of understand from a human point of view. But in a machine learning model, we may not totally understand what are the features being used. So this neural network, or rather the features, we actually call it a hidden layer or multiple hidden layers. And these hidden layers are something that the machine learning model used to simulate out the data set. Well, one disadvantage of using this machine learning model is that hidden layers remain a black box, quite literal here. So we have no idea of understanding what are the features or what kind of information is being used to generate our simulated data set. And it can cause a huge problem because how simulation is actually performed is by having these hidden layers mixed with some noise or noisy data. And hidden layers will try to identify certain characteristics of features that it has initially learned from the training data set and use it to generate out what it thinks resembles the data that we want. So here we can have different pictures of cats generated using just the three features that it initially learned. And all these pictures actually fits the conditions or the features that it has identified. For example, the two triangular ears, the eyes, the mouth. But as human, we can see that the last diagram is a bat and not a cat, even though it fits all the features that a cat typically has. And although this simulated data conforms to the features identified in the hidden layers, it is not accurate. So the next question would be, how can we improve our simulation to make it more accurate, but at the same time not subjected to human bias? Another way could be to introduce another machine learning model to perform the classification. So in that way, we use an unsupervised machine learning model to discriminate if the data is actual data or is just a simulated data. And actually, this is the basis for what I'm going to talk about today, which is the Generative Adversarial Network, also known as GAN. So how GAN works is we have two machine learning models to outcompete one another. And let me just break it down for you step by step on how it's being performed. So first, we have one machine learning model that tries to perform the simulation, generate out the data set. So I will just stick with the cat picture as the illustration. Now, machine learning model generate out the simulated data set. Maybe the first few runs it sucks and it generates out really weird images. So the second stage comes in where we are adding or we are mixing the simulated data together with actual data to be input into a second machine learning model that acts as a classification machine. So this second model will then differentiate if or rather classify each of the data if it's a simulated data or an actual data. So the first scenario would be that this machine learning model, it starts at identifying the simulated versus the actual data. And then it will just have to reflect on itself and fine-tune its parameter to better identify the simulated versus actual data. Maybe on the features being learned, well, it has to figure out a way to upgrade itself. So then it comes to a point where the second model becomes so good at discriminating the actual versus simulated data, and it just it is spot on in identifying if a data is real or fake. Then the second situation comes in where it is so good at discriminating the data set. Now, the first model that generates out the simulated data set will need to go back, reflect, up, fine-tune its parameters to make better simulation. So this forms a rather competitive cycle that helps to improve both models at the same time, or improve both models after several iterations. So after a few iterations, our our simulation being generated resembles more and more like an actual cat, but it's still not perfect. This cat is still making pasta, listening to a headphone. That's not what an actual cat does, except for Garfield. And so then the cycle continues. Either model 2 upgrades itself or model 1 upgrades itself to better reflect or to better perform the simulation. And after multiple rounds of iterations, now we get a cat picture that looks really close or almost perfectly matching what an actual cat looks like. So then the question would be, is the second model able to differentiate between the two cats or the two different data? Well, if the simulated data is so similar or almost indistinguishable from the real data, then ideally the probability of correctly guessing the identity of the data set will be close to 50%, same as flipping a coin. Um, and this is exactly what we are trying to achieve here. So what we want to see is that the accuracy of our model 2 is 50%, no matter how many times model 2 upgrades its or fine-tunes its parameter, and no matter how many times model 1 fine-tunes its parameter, we've reached a plateau of 50% accuracy. So this is basically how the generative adversarial network works. And just to make it slightly more complicated for you, I will introduce you the actual terminologies for this model 1 and model 2 and how the whole process works. So the first model that we have initially spoke about, that's our generative model, and that's responsible for creating realistic simulations. Then the classification model, the model 2, is actually a discriminative model. And how do we mathematically judge the performance of our discriminative model? Is we want to have a number representative of how well they perform. And that's why we are using accuracy. So we are looking at how well does the discriminative model identify if a data, an individual belongs to a simulated data set or a real data set. So if the accuracy of our discriminative model is more than 50%, that means that it's doing a very good job at identifying the simulated data set. Then model 1 will have to fine-tune its parameter to perform better simulation. Alternatively, if the accuracy of our discriminative model is less than 50%, then it's doing a rather bad job at identifying the two data sets. Or in this case, it will have to upgrade itself and fine-tune the different parameters that it's using to identifying the difference. And congratulations, now you have understood how a GAN works. So you can now apply it to your different data sets or different purposes. Now, before I end off, I would like to do a quick summary of what we have just spoke about, and also some caveats. So the first and the most important caveat would be that the training data set that's fed into a generative model should be isolated from the discriminative model because you don't want any data leakage. That's almost equivalent to giving the answer sheet for an exam to the discriminative model, and it basically knows whatever answer or the true answers to the questions. And second caveat would be that as with most machine learning models, you need to put in good curated data so that whatever is being learned will not have errors being carried forward into subsequent iterations and subsequent learning models. And the reason we are using this GAN approach is because the combination of these two machine learning models can help to reduce human bias. And also it has a clear goal, clear end goal for the models to stop and we say that this is the perfect simulation or the perfect outcome we are trying to achieve, instead of just an arbitrary threshold to say or we will stop this at certain duration, even though our simulation is not perfect. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank my lab mates for their support. Yeah. Thank you. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask them.